Excellent. So, okay, feet hip width apart, and directly below your hips, pointing forwards, or maybe just slightly turned out if that's more comfortable for you. But just be wary of that going too far, and let your hips sink back. Turn from the center of your body. Ease yourself in to the session. To start off nice and gently, just moving within whatever space seems to be available for you. And what normally happens is you just move a little bit and suddenly sort of like muscles warm up and space opens up a bit. So gradually fill in the space as it becomes available, not forcing anything. Make sure you're turning from the center of your body. Imagine there's a little spotlight in your navel, panning across the room. So the feeling is that you're pulling on your arms. And this is one of the distinctive qualities, I think. Pulling on your arms is perhaps not quite the right way of phrasing it. It's very difficult to describe accurately these feelings, and we all experience them slightly differently. So, but you can see here, I'm in this position. I turn my body, that pulls my shoulder around, and then my arm follows, likewise in the other direction. They loosen your shoulders as we start up. So hips and shoulders are the big joints that can easily get sort of bunged up. But a lot of that will just dissolve away with the movement. And just start to feel the weight of your arms and get that feeling of moving through water. Imagine you're in water up to shoulder height. So it requires just a little bit more effort to bring your arms around. But not a sort of tight effort, not a straining effort. I mean, if you think about moving in water, then we tend to quite instinctively soften a little bit in the water. The joints soften. We don't hold the muscles so tight. And that's a very good sort of way of imagining the quality of the movement that, again, we want to maintain all the way through. So your arms swing around quite sort of heavy, the sort of feeling that you might get. Some people, when they get out the shower, they just sort of like whip the towel around onto their back, and that feeling of pulling around. Maybe here I'll get a bit closer. The noise that my hands make as they swing around. And what happens is, because your arms are a fairly consistent length in proportion to your body, one hand will fall about here. So on one side you've got spleen and stomach, on the other side you've got the liver. The other hand will come round and it will just swing across your back a little bit, striking in this sort of area where your spine meets your pelvis. Just above that point, in the small of the back, there's the acupuncture point called the gate of life. Now, some people will do this exercise like this. So rather than this, they'll do this. They'll actually bring the hand up quite deliberately. Given the exercise the name knocking at the gate of life, so named after the acupuncture point. I think that's not necessary, I don't think, because these points, the influence of these points spreads out a little bit, and this sort of like slapping on the spine will just create a vibration up into that area anyway. So it's not necessary to be 100% precise with these things. We're not trying to stick a needle into that point or anything like that. So knocking at the gate of life. Try and keep your knees fairly still. Again, I'll come a bit closer there. Knees pointing in the same direction as your toes. There'll be a little bit of movement there, but we want to avoid this or this, which is a natural movement when we turn. It's natural for our legs to be drawn around by our hips. So we try and counter that with a movement. You can either think of it as rotating your knee outwards or pushing the knee forwards. A lot depends exactly how your knees respond. Mine tend to get pulled over like this. Other people's knees will tend not to do this, but will tend to do this. They'll get pulled back when they do this. So I think it partly depends on whether your weight is moving and the degree to which you're sinking down in each leg. But whichever way it is, the counter movement is produced at the same time, so that to all intents and purposes from the outside, our knees are fairly steady. So we avoid too much rotation in the knee, which is both in the long term could be fairly harmful for your knee, and in the short term is actually, excuse me, it's actually something that as soon as you do that, you do lose stability. If you think about, you know, going back probably to school days, somebody coming up behind you and just sort of like tapping you in the back of the knee, you'd be standing there and suddenly this would happen because it's unexpected. You'd go over. Just that when we do it to ourselves, we probably do it quite a lot, and so we don't notice any. You know, this might happen, but then we might do something to adjust for that. That's quite a subtle element, and it takes a while to build that movement in on automatic. And then just raising your arms a little. So your arms are out in front, they don't go behind your shoulders. Hands are palm up, elbows hanging down, a bit broader across the chest. So there's things going on here that we notice in the slower movement. So for instance, with this one, if you were to raise your arms up a little bit more and then lower them down, you'll notice changes in your back, your sides, the front of your body in response to that. These are all things, all elements of all of the movements. Okay, and then just shake out. So as well as an intrinsic value in their own right, these swinging exercises, the whole variety of them, they do actually point us towards aspects of the art that we're going to want to try and remain aware of. Quite often we notice them more easily with the faster movements. The rhythm of the movement is another one that is easier to spot under those circumstances. So feet are hip width apart. Your weight is forwards, so ideally resting just behind the ball of each foot with the slight tilt that gives you, neutralized by your hips just dropping back. There's a soft curve in your knees. It will be very strong, of course, in the quadricep muscles. And then your hips drop back a little bit more. And before it gets too much of a strain, just let your legs push you up and then sinking down. Try as much as possible to keep your shoulders above your hips. So sometimes we find ourselves just unconsciously compensating for what we feel might be a lack of movement in the legs by doing something like this. And that's especially noticeable when we bring our arms into the movement, because as soon as we bring the arms in, we often lose touch with what's happening below, and we end up doing this. So try and get this movement correct. And notice my arms hanging down to my sides again. I'll come a bit closer. When I'm in the top position, see where my hand falls, there's my hip. So it'll be something like my middle ring or little finger on that line from shoulder to hip to ankle. When I go back, then my arm is still on that same line from shoulder to hip. So pushing up and sinking down. So there's a challenge here to maintain the sense of movement in your legs, which ultimately means that your whole body is moving. When you are required to bring your arms more into the movement. But what we want to do is just to be aware of the movement through our whole body. Body expands and contracts, lengthens and shortens if you prefer. And just create a shape for that movement. Mold a shape, mold the movement into a particular shape. So we can feel the movement expanding and contracting in belly, solar plexus, and the ribs up to our spine. Now, just spread your fingers out a little bit so that they're pointing downwards, they're slightly curved in. And imagine as you sink down that you're pushing your fingers down into soft mud. And then when you push up, you're pulling your fingers out of the mud. You might want to try it with both hands or one hand. But what you get, of course, is when your fingers get pushed down into the mud, there's a little bit of resistance. So there's a bit of sort of pressure, compression in the fingers. And when you come up, the mud's pulling on your fingers. So it's as though your fingers are lengthening and contracting very slightly. And we want to try and get that movement going up to our wrists and elbows, to our shoulders. So this means that we become aware of the movement, the internal movement, the sensations of change in our arms. So when we get this, we know that there's something happening in our arms, and we're less inclined, I think, to try and just let the arms take over, or to just try too hard with the arms. If you now curve your hands in, leave them down here, don't try and do it, but imagine you've got a heavy box in your hands, and the same thing, you would try to lift the box with a push up from your feet, and then it just draws you back down. And that expansion coming up through the body, you'll feel it most, I think, with this exercise in your belly. It just pushes your elbows out. And then you turn your hands, imagine a ball underneath your hand that you're pressing down into water. Remind yourself of that feeling in your legs, in your back, those sensations of change. Try and maintain them in the movement. Give yourself a moment when you're down. Don't come straight up, but just wait until you feel the push up from the legs. And similarly here, see if you can wait until you feel the pull of gravity. Ideally, I suppose, on your hips and lower back, but really wherever you feel it. But try and get that sensation of your hips being pulled down around about here, and they start to go down, and your shoulders follow, and your arms follow your shoulders. And that awareness of detail will just help to stop you rushing at the movement. And at the same time, of course, it will bring those more subtle movements into the whole movement more effectively. So we want to focus both internally and externally. So we want to try and get the, if you like, the choreography, the patterning of the movement correct. We want to be aware of the environment we're in, where we are, and so on and so forth. But sometimes you might want to just close your eyes and just draw your attention in and really notice those patterns of movement within your body. And then changing to the wild goose. So those patterns of movement, it's a bit like just being aware of undercurrents in a river or something like that. It takes a little while to become aware of them. We can think of that just as a momentum, a flow, a movement of energy, however we choose to label them, to understand them. So we have three areas, three elements, three major elements now in the movement. We have the physical patterning, choreography, the body. We have our awareness of both inner and outer movement, and that awareness of energy. So body, mind, and energy, the three treasures, the three jewels of Tai Chi Chuan. And then changing to parting the cloud, same in your legs and your hips, just let your arms drop down, push up, again your arms being pushed up, your elbows drawing your fingers out, a smooth circle. Try not to make that circle too big, you don't want to stiffen in your shoulders. You could imagine somebody just gently leaning on your shoulders so that you're actually unable to move them. Or just remember that feeling of pulling your fingers out of mud so that it reminds you of those connections. Feet to hips, hips to shoulders, shoulders to elbows, elbows to wrists, wrists to fingers. Now, do one more of these, then we're going to go back to the first of them, do them in a little sequence. So bringing your hands around, starting with rooting down, and again, just feeling the expansion in your body, principally belly and lower back. And then as you change to the wild goose, again, belly, lower back, but moving up a bit more into the solar plexus. Remember earlier we felt some of those changes in the body, and then belly, solar plexus, and upper part of your chest. So that line of movement, that progression up through our body, belly, solar plexus to chest, is the sort of feeling of expansion moving up through the body that we want to try and feel when we breathe in. So if you're interested in the breathing, and always remember that not everybody's comfortable focusing on their breathing, it can be a distraction. So if it is, just ignore what I'm about to say. But that expansion slowly rising up will serve to draw the air down into your lungs. So what I would suggest, if you're wanting to begin to coordinate movement and breath, is to focus on parting the clouds and see how it feels to take a breath in. You might find that you're breathing out before the end of the movement. Don't try and stop that. Just let yourself sort of breathe freely and easily. But every now and then, just remind yourself of that method that we call abdominal breathing or bellows breathing, as you do Heart in the Clouds. Just then, just that for the moment. Everything else will follow on quite nicely from that. Always remembering that whatever I say about the breath should feel comfortable, and if it's not, let your body breathe as it is comfortable. Don't force a breathing method or a breathing pattern on your body. Don't hold your breath. Don't do this little set one more time. Some movements will lend themselves to working with your breath better than others. So you'll work out which ones work for you in the course of time. So now change into Dragonflux to Stars from the Sky, focusing on one side of your body. Push up, sink down, drawing your hand down. Let your attention move across to the opposite side, and same thing on the opposite side. Push up and pull down. Don't rush the changeover. It's almost like you're going to pluck an apple off a tree, or better to think of a soft fruit like a peach, so you don't grip tightly. Remember that nice steady rhythm in the movement. Another thing that can make you aware of the internal movement, the flow, the energy. So it can be a useful thing to focus on. Expansion to contraction to expansion to contraction is the underlying rhythm of the whole art. Yin yang, yin yang, yin yang. Do one more of these. Changing, pushing in two directions first of all. Just push up, bring your back lengthening and then contracting. Don't do the turn yet, but push out, expanding. This time, a sideways expansion across your back. So that awareness of movement and change within your body opens up a whole sphere of movement that we can begin to work with. Our awareness, our mind is very important here because we seem to have a great deal of influence over these small changes. What that means is, if you wanted to say, if for instance, your back was a bit tight today, then this exercise, working as it does on the back, don't put your hands back, keep them in front of your body, can produce a sensation as though your back was just being very gently massaged. And we focus on that feeling and almost imagine that feeling spreading through the back. So we can begin to find ways to encourage a releasing that the rhythm for instance, will resonate in that area. The flow will begin to work in that area, will begin to dissolve some of the tightness and some of the stiffness. This time we're going to add the turn without actually tightening the back. So from here, remember, hands are always just slightly in front of your shoulders. I push out, and what I do is I turn in my hips, and that draws my shoulders around. My hand stays in the same position relative to my shoulder. And back, and then out, and back. And then facing the front, and pushing out. Your arm, again, I come closer, will rotate, and that rotation should be from your shoulder joint here. The hands palm up, and I bring my hands in, the hands are palm in, and then the shoulder joint rotates through the whole of the length of the arm, and that rotates the hand out. You have to be able to sink back in your hips to loosen your shoulders to make this happen. I'll show you from the side. See here, hands are palm in, and then there's a rotation outwards. I've seen this exercise recommended for tendonitis in arms and shoulders, and I think it's because of that rotation. So again, being aware of movements within the body, being precise in our movements, makes these exercises more useful. And again, we have that interaction of the three treasures: body, mind, and movement, body, mind, and energy. And this is something that grows through the practice of Tai Chi and Qigong. Quite often our first experience would be just feeling good, feeling relaxed, maybe a bit more energetic, moving a bit more freely, which is good. And that we should always be sort of feeling those kind of qualities. Like practicing anything, like spending a long time focusing on anything, we notice more and more. Changing this time, let your hands drop down, and then pushing your arm out, elbows slightly curved, so your hand swings up until it's more or less in line with your nose. Imagine the line from the nose down to your navel and down the center line of the body. Almost like you're just stroking down that center line. And if it's comfortable, we add a turn. And so what happens is you turn in your hips and maybe just slightly more in your shoulders. So that brings your arm across a little bit. But be careful of stiffening up. Don't wrench your arm across. Don't tighten in your shoulder. Now switch sides. First of all, without the turn. And then, if it's comfortable, you add the turn. See if that just enables the arm coming across a little bit more, but not pulling hard on the back part of that shoulder. So the center of the body, hips and waist, are the parts of the body that direct your upper body. So now, let your arms rest, let them just hang by your sides. Push up a little bit, then as you sink down, push your hips back. So now that center part of your body is rotating vertically, and it continues to do that, but in the other direction, you let your hips drop back and you push up. And notice the response in your shoulders and your head. As your hips go back, they'll tend to tilt forwards. Try and make sure that you're not doing this, just collapsing. Keep that fairly straight line through the middle of your upper body. I mean, it's not rigid or anything, but so your head goes forwards as a result of your hips going back. And then pushing up, let your hands come over. This is rowing a boat in the middle of the lake. Sinking down and dropping back. Expanding and contracting. Again, if using your breathing is useful to you, if it is useful to you, then it's on the expanding stage that we would take a breath in. So your in-breath would start here, you breathe in. Don't hold your breath. If you have to breathe out before the end of that stage, then do so. But that would make the out-breath come just as you're angling forwards. One more time. Same idea, but this time when you come up, before you push the hips back, turn a little bit, then push the hips back, let your hands slide forward, go across to the other side, let your hips drop down, and turn. And then reverse the movement, turn, push back. So your hands are just in front of you. Imagine them resting on a table and get pushed forwards and then drawn back. This is an exercise called polishing the table. One more time in each direction. And then rest. Give your legs a shake. So I mentioned the breathing a few times there. As always, breathing patterns, breathing methods. So the way of breathing are optional. The breathing isn't. So in that the pattern and the method are of secondary importance. Not everybody will be able to focus on the breath as well as everything else. That's understandable, of course. Not everybody's comfortable thinking about their breathing, so just think about their breathing kind of dominates everything. So if you're in that category, just trust that the combination of correct movement and correct posture will actually improve your breathing, which in my experience it will. Not everybody in the Tai Chi world automatically teaches breathing with the exercises. On the other hand, some people are the other way. I quite like the breathing patterns, you might. So I offer them as as one aspect of the whole art, but by no means the be all and end all of the whole art. Your breathing will be helped by a change in your posture and by the movements that we make, whether or not you're concentrating, focusing on it. So from the parallel position, just begin to transfer your weight from side to side a little bit. You go to about 60% of your weight in what we would refer to as the full leg, and then move across. More than that, and you're going to start doing that, and everything will go out of line. So it's really quite a small movement. If you imagine the center line of the body like this, you can see that the pole in front of me. As I move across, you can see where it gets to, just inside the foot that I'm moving towards. Now, however, if you go across, say, into your left foot, raise the heel of the right foot and I move across. And when I turn, I get to here. And now the center line is going down through the part of the foot that I want it to rest in. So just behind the ball of the foot. I put right heel down, I go across, I raise the left heel, and the same thing. So what you could think with this to begin with is that you move across to here, you plant the stick, and then your body turns around that center line like a wheel turning around the axle. It's a little bit rigid doing it that way, but it's a useful starting point. So we'd have two stages. One, your weight would move across, the heel will come up, and then two, you turn. And then you put the heel down, you go across 1 and 2. 1 and 2. Now, eventually what will happen is they'll overlap. They're really two parts of the same movement. Now, hands are in front of you. And once again, we want to make sure that our hands don't dominate the movement. We don't lose this movement of the weight. So once again, we can use some kind of image to give a sense of energy, a sense of function, intent with the hands. And it might be something like holding a tray of drinks is a favorite of mine, because when we do that, we're actually aiming to keep the hands still. On the other hand, if that doesn't work for you, you might want to imagine, I can show you this, it's a medicine ball. You might want to imagine you've got a ball in your hand and you're just carrying it across like this. And you can see when I do that, my hands are fairly steady. There's various things you could try with this. Let me just get this. I've got a little stick here. You could use the inside of a cardboard tube that comes from a pack of tin foil or something like that. And again, you can see this helps me to just keep my hands fairly still, despite the fact that they're quite active. So there's a sense of movement again, a sense of energy within the arms and the hand. And what we're going to do is, as always, we create a shape in the mind. We sort of imagine the action is going to be hitting the ball in front of the shoulder. So as you go across that movement, your hand just pushes out to meet the ball, turns palm down, and then on the other side. You may notice, especially if you're more familiar with these exercises, that there's a feeling of expansion up through your body as your hand rises, not dissimilar to the feeling we get in Dragonflux, the stars from the sky. This is a good exercise to think about what's going on. You know, we've got the same soft quality, sense of the whole body moving, the rhythm of the movement, so on and so forth. But alongside that, quite a dynamic image, one of hitting the ball, quite a momentum, a strength there. So this is again very characteristic of Tai Chi. But also a precision. You know, the ball is coming down. That's where you meet the ball. It's not just a kind of random movement. So there's quite a lot in this that we look for in Tai Chi as a whole. One more on each side. Good, and shake out. So we gradually become familiar with a series of sensations within the body. For all the variety that we get in Tai Chi, there really is only one sort of feeling in the movement. When we lose that feeling, then we go through a process of almost analysis, of investigation. Are the feet in the right place? Am I moving the weight? Am I turning in the center? We always come back to those basics, so we can begin to make the correction. Okay, so changing the stance from the hip width stance, feet parallel. You keep the width. You turn your left foot out, step forward with your right toes point straight forwards. And now again, the weight transfer, this time filling and emptying from front to back, from back to front. A gentle push from the ground. And again, it's important to move from the ground so we don't sort of angle forwards or backwards. Again, I'll show you here that as I move, I'm staying in relation to this center line of the body. I'm not doing this or this. So as much as possible, that center line moving with me. And again, it moves to close to the point that I would want it to be. In fact, this is slightly forced, of course, because it's on the outside of my body. The center line would be on the inside of the body. So apart from that, this happens. And then, like with the earlier transfer of the weight, you go forwards, you let your back knee fold in, and you can see that just moves me forwards, but you can see now where the pole is going. And then I go back and I sink down and I raise my toes, and again, more of my weight goes back. So the target destination going downwards for that center line of your body would be just behind the board of the foot. It might be a bit further back for you. It depends, but no further forwards and more to the front of your body than behind. Gradually, more of your weight settling in to the supporting leg, keeping the alignment, trying not to tilt in your hips. We found earlier that when we do tilt the pelvis, our shoulders and our head change their position. But for this one, we're trying to keep the position so that now we can settle into our back foot and just bring the front foot in. Push out, put your heel down, lower your toes, move forwards, let the heel come up and come in. Try not to think of this as an exercise in balancing on one leg. You're going to move forwards, you're going to root down, you're going to align yourself, you're going to root down again, and then you bring the foot in. Push out, do the same thing, and the next foot. So all the movement is downwards through your body. The balancing factor is actually the push up from the ground. I only need to balance in terms of what we normally think of as balance if I've somehow done this. If I've tilted over, now I need to do something to balance the movement. So you're looking to align yourself, to root down, so that your body's stable. If you've got the stability, you don't need to think about balancing. But if you do have a little wobble, if you do get there, and everybody does just like that, remember what happened in some of the earlier exercises. Rowing a boat in the middle of the lake, polishing the table. In order to bring our head and our shoulders back to the upright position, we didn't strain here, because that just makes it worse. We actually let the hips drop. And that was exaggerated. If I do this there, I'm tilting over. What I really need to do is to let my hips drop, and I need to let this hip drop a little bit lower. That's quite tricky. You may have noticed that wasn't deliberate. Now I drop down, but quite useful. Shake out. So this is where the advantage of using some kind of support, a wall or a table or something like that, because you can play about with this. You can sort of have the wall and think, well, what happens if I do that? Okay, so now I'm going to fall over, but can I just relax a little bit? Can I get this back? And so on and so forth. So once again, you begin to investigate your options. So try all that on the other side, with the other foot forwards, easy and gently. Think about that center line of your body. Remember, it's pushing from the ground, not leaning with your shoulders. So this isn't like sort of ordinary walking, if you want to think of it like that. Raising your toes and your heel. And when you feel you've got the majority of your weight safely, comfortably settling in, that's when you step in. Either just keep your foot up in the air a little bit, or if you do feel a bit wobbly, just put the toes down. Give yourself a chance to settle. Arguably, this exercise is more useful if you do have a few little wobbles, because in our daily life, we're unlikely to get through a day without the odd sort of jolt in one way or another. So learning how we can work with those, how we can sort of lose stability a little bit, but get it back, is actually very useful. And this time, bring your foot in and step through. So, you know, eventually you can play with this, and you can deliberately throw yourself offline, as long as you can do so safely, obviously holding on to something or whatever. And then, having gotten yourself offline, you could just say, okay, can I get back? You know, how do I return to this upright posture? And then take some steps in the other direction. And if you do that enough, then you'll find that if you walk into the shops, there's a little slope in the pavement you didn't realize, you go slightly offline, your body will start to automatically adapt. And so the routing down and the alignment will actually start to be of very practical use to you. Now, have your right foot forwards. Sink your weight back. Once again, the challenge is, can we maintain that while we're doing something with our arms? And it's just like, you know, walking down the road, you're chatting to somebody. You don't want to think, right, my hips need to be here, I've got to do this. You would never get anywhere. So again, we want these ideas to slip into the background, but not to disappear. Start on your back foot, hands on your belly. Push forward, sinking into your front foot. Pigeon spreads its wings. Sink back, drawing your arms in to cover your belly again. And again, we have an exercise that may lend itself to working with your breath. The in-breath would come in the expanding stage again. So again, just see how that feels. So again, don't lift your shoulders up, shoulders dropping down. Elbows drawing on your wrists, wrists drawing on your shoulders, on your fingers, sorry. The space between your arm and your chest, the pit of the arm, is expanding and contracting. One more. Now, sink back, let your hands drop down to your sides, ease forwards, and as you arrive in the front leg, let your arms swing out. This is one of those rare movements where our hands do actually end up behind our shoulders very briefly. They're here, not here, but here. And then they get pulled through as we settle. So imagine doing this in water again. It's a fisherman cast a net. One more time. And then again, taking that movement and just creating a more precise shape, bring your hands in, turn them forwards, pushing wave. Your arms get pushed away from your body and they curve upwards and then draw back. Your elbows will go out a little bit. So that wave-like movement, that energy flowing through your body, once more is given quite a strong focus. The shape of the movement, the intent of the movement implies something quite strong and quite dynamic. You're pushing, like you're imagine pushing something heavy like a car or a wardrobe or a piano or something. Excellent, good. Change over. So same 3 exercises on the other side. Pigeon spreads its wings. Start off with starting in your back foot. One more time. And then fisherman castanet. And then change into pushing wave. One more time. And bring your feet down. Give your legs a shake. Right. Rubbing your hands together. The pads of your fingers, just a light tapping over your face. Over your head and neck. Down to one shoulder. Your arm. The other side. Your back. Around your hips. Legs. Light on your belly. Onto the upper part of the chest. Shake out. The closing exercise brings us back to the basic stance and the basic feeling. I talked about that idea of sort of coming back to an alignment, coming back to stability. In a way, you could think of that as kind of yang is the outgoing movement and the one where you're more likely to wobble around. And so yang is always followed by yin, the contraction, coming back into your center, into your root, into your alignment, kind of encapsulated in this exercise. So 4 stages: sink down, push up, bring your hands around as though you're going to hold a ball against your chest, draw your hands in, turn them palm down, and sink down. Let gravity just draw you down. Wait until you feel the push back up. So there's if you like, a kind of natural cycle here, like a ball bouncing. You drop a ball, it will hit the ground, it will bounce up. Eventually, gravity will take over, pull it down again, and so on. One more round. And shake out. Excellent. Once again, it goes so quickly, doesn't it? Thank you very much, both of you.